The room was tense long before the door opened. The air seemed heavier, as if the walls themselves knew something was wrong. Students whispered to one another in low, uneasy voices, their eyes darting toward the entrance every time the faint hum of the corridor echoed. Outside, the sound of footsteps grew louder, slow, deliberate, and heavy, as if the one approaching wasn't in any hurry to arrive, but wanted every step to be heard. It wasn't just walking, it was a message. The teacher, an elderly alien, with thin, trembling antennae, stopped mid-sentence and glanced toward the door. The silence in the room thickened. No one moved, no one even breathed too loud. Everyone knew who was coming. The stories had been whispered in shadowy corners for weeks. A killer, dangerous beyond measure, had been transferred here for observation. Observation, of course, was just the polite word. Everyone knew this was a test, to see how long he could be contained. The door slid open with a hiss, and in walked a tall, broad figure dressed in plain black. His eyes were sharp, scanning the room as if measuring each person's worth in an instant. His gaze was cold, almost mechanical, but his movements were fluid, controlled, like someone who knew exactly how much strength he held and exactly when to use it. His presence was suffocating. Every alien in the room tensed, their skin paling or darkening depending on species, their limbs curling inward as if to make themselves smaller. The air carried a faint metallic scent, like dried blood that no one wanted to admit they noticed. No one dared to meet his eyes, no one except one person. Near the back of the room sat a human, brown hair, relaxed posture, one leg casually stretched out under the desk. He didn't flinch when the killer walked in, didn't glance away when those cold eyes swept across the class. In fact, he smiled. Wasn't a mocking smile, or one of nervous fear pretending to be confidence. This was calm, steady, dangerous in its own way. The killer noticed immediately. His gaze lingered on the human a fraction longer than anyone else. The rest of the class shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the two, as if expecting one of them to explode at any second. The teacher cleared his throat, clearly unsettled. "Class," he began, his voice shaking just slightly. "This is Ace, our new student." No one asked his name. Everyone already knew it, even if they wouldn't dare speak it. His name was whispered in station corridors, scribbled in digital message boards, a name tied to violent records, unsolved disappearances, and blood-stained reports the authorities pretended didn't exist. The killer stepped inside fully, the door sealing shut behind him like a trap closing. His boots made a low, steady thud with each step as he moved toward the empty seat assigned to him. That seat was right next to the human. Gasps rippled through the room. It wasn't safe to sit next to him. Everyone knew that. But the human didn't move. He didn't shift away, didn't tense up. If anything, his relaxed expression deepened, as though this was exactly what he wanted. The killer sat down, the chair creaking slightly under his weight. For a moment, neither spoke. The class tried to focus on the lesson, but their eyes kept flicking toward that side of the room, waiting for the sound of a fight or worse. The tension felt like it could snap at any moment. Then, in the middle of that thick silence, the human leaned slightly toward the killer and said, in a voice just loud enough for him to hear, "You're late." It wasn't an insult. Fear it was. Casual. The killer's head tilted just slightly, his eyes narrowing as if trying to understand what kind of person would say that to him. A slow grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not a friendly grin, but something sharper, something intrigued. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, someone wasn't looking at him like a monster to avoid, but as a challenge. The rest of the day passed in a haze for the other students. They couldn't stop watching the human and the killer. Every time the teacher asked a question, the human would answer easily, his voice calm, unshaken. The killer said almost nothing, but his eyes kept drifting toward his new seatmate. It wasn't just curiosity, it was evaluation. The kind a predator uses when deciding if something is prey or an equal. When the final bell rang, students rushed out as if the room was on fire, desperate to escape the tension. But the human didn't hurry. He gathered his things slowly. The killer didn't move either. They left together, side by side, without a word. and for the first time in years, the killer wasn't the most dangerous presence in the hallway. The tension in the air was still heavy after that smile. No one spoke. Even the faint hum of the ventilation system seemed louder than usual. The alien killer, tall, broad, with a strange, gray-scaled skin that shimmered faintly in the light, stood in the center of the room. His eyes were narrow slits of yellow, scanning every face like a predator looking for weakness. Most people in that room had already given him what he wanted: fear. They sat rigid, not daring to breathe too loudly, eyes darting away from him. But one person hadn't flinched: Ethan, a human from Earth. The killer tilted his head slightly, almost confused, as he kept his eyes locked on Ethan. "Do you find this amusing, human?" the alien asked, his voice like a deep growl, vibrating through the air. Ethan didn't answer right away, just leaned back in his chair, arms resting casually on the armrests, as if this wasn't a life-or-death situation. Then slowly he spoke. "I've seen worse." The words were quiet, almost soft, but they hit the room like an explosion. Everyone turned to stare at Ethan, eyes wide in disbelief. The alien killer's brow furrowed, his expression shifting into something darker. "Worse?" he repeated, almost offended. "Do you know who I am?" Ethan shrugged, his eyes never leaving the alien. "I know enough. You've killed people, hurt people, made them afraid. That's your game. But where I come from, fear doesn't last long. We learn to push through it." His tone was calm, steady, and that somehow made it more unnerving than... If he had shouted, the alien took a slow step forward. Its claws clicked against the metal floor. "Do you think I won't kill you, human?" Ethan's lips curled into something between a smirk and a smile. "I think you've already decided not to." That stopped the alien in his tracks. The other students in the room glanced between them, trying to figure out what Ethan meant. The alien tilted his head again, but this time it wasn't confusion. It was curiosity. "And why would you believe that?" Ethan leaned forward just slightly, enough to make his voice carry more, because predators don't waste time talking to prey unless they're trying to understand it. His gaze was sharp now, and for the first time, it wasn't clear who was actually in control of the conversation. A low, rumbling chuckle came from the alien. It wasn't a pleasant sound. It was the kind of laugh that could turn into violence in a second. "You're different, human. Most of your kind would be begging by now." "I'm not most of my kind," Ethan replied without hesitation.
Ats!
"And you're not the first thing that's tried to kill me?" That last sentence sent a shiver through the room, though no one could tell if it was from fear or intrigue. Alien stared at Ethan for a long moment, then finally moved away from him. He paced slowly across the room, claws scraping against the floor with every step. "Interesting," he muttered. "Maybe this'll be fun after all." No one understood why the killer had backed off. It wasn't surrender. It felt more like he was saving something for later. But the message was clear. Ethan wasn't going to be easy prey. After the alien finally left, the room erupted in hushed whispers. People demanded to know what Ethan was thinking. "Are you insane?" one of the alien students hissed, her scales rippling with agitation. "That thing could have ripped you apart." Ethan simply stood, stretching like nothing unusual had happened. "Maybe," he said.
Ah!
"But if you show fear to someone like him, you've already lost." As he left the room, several eyes followed him, not out of fear this time, but out of a strange mix of awe and uncertainty. They had just witnessed something they didn't understand. And somewhere deep down, they wanted to know what exactly made humans different. But while the others were whispering, the alien killer was in another room, speaking quietly to someone through a hidden comm device. "The human didn't break," he said, his voice low and serious. "I want his record." About where he came from, whoever was on the other end responded in a language no one else could hear, but the alien's expression changed. It went from curious to something darker. A slow grin spread across his face. "Ah, so that's why." From that moment, the game between predator and prey was no longer simple. It wasn't just about fear anymore. It was about testing limits. And the alien killer had just decided that Ethan's limits needed to be pushed until they snapped. Ethan didn't know it yet, but that day had marked him. From now on, wherever he went, Eyes would follow. Some wanted to see him survive. Others wanted to see him fall. And one very dangerous alien wanted to be the one to break him. The room was silent except for the low hum of the station's ventilation system. Every eye was locked on Marcus. The killer, known only by the name Krell, was still standing near the doorway, his massive frame blocking half the light from outside. The air felt heavy, tense enough that the other crew members could almost hear their own heartbeats. But Marcus? He didn't move. He didn't flinch. His face was unreadable, and that faint smile still sat on his lips like it had been carved there. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't madness. It was something else. Something everyone in the room couldn't quite name, and that was exactly what made it worse. Krell stepped forward. His boots were thick and heavy, making a dull thud each time they touched the metal floor. The crew instinctively shifted back in their seats, creating more space between themselves and the approaching predator. Krell was twice the size of any being in the room except Marcus, who remained seated, his elbows resting casually on the table. His smile never changed. The killer stopped right in front of him, towering over him like a shadow ready to swallow him whole. The room was holding its breath. Then Krell spoke, his voice deep and almost metallic. "You're not afraid?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement, one filled with curiosity and maybe even a hint of annoyance. Marcus looked up at him, with calm eyes. "Fear is useful," he said slowly, "but only if you let it control you for the right reasons. You're just a man with a weapon. I've seen worse." The crew members exchanged shocked glances. Nobody spoke to Krell. Like that, nobody. Krell tilted his head slightly, studying Marcus as if trying to see what was hidden beneath his skin. Then, to everyone's surprise, the killer laughed. It was a low, rumbling sound that didn't match the tension in the air. "I like you," Krell said, stepping back just enough to give Marcus some space. "Most crumble before I even speak. But you're different." His eyes glimmered in the dim light. "You're dangerous." The captain of the station, who had been watching this strange exchange in stunned silence, finally found her voice. "Krell, why are you here?" she demanded, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay firm. Krell ignored her, keeping his focus locked on Marcus. "I have an offer," he said. The crew collectively leaned forward, both dreading and needing to hear what would come next. "I was sent here to kill one of you," Krell continued, "but I've changed my mind. I want to work with him." He nodded at Marcus. "The rest of you can live. For now." The words landed like a weight on the room. The captain's face went pale. "Work with him? For what purpose?" Krell smiled, showing sharp teeth that caught the dim light. "'Cause there's something bigger coming. When it arrives, you'll need someone who doesn't just survive. Fear someone who makes others fear him." His gaze swept over the crew. "He's the only one here who fits that description." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying the killer. "Why me?" he asked. Krell's eyes narrowed. "Because you didn't flinch. You looked at me like I was a storm you'd already walked through. I've met warriors from 100 worlds, but they all broke under my gaze. You didn't." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "I want to see what you can do." The crew erupted into quiet whispers, each member trying to process what was happening. A killer, one of the most feared. Names in the outer sectors had just walked in, chosen a human, and offered an alliance. Nobody knew if this was a twisted game or a genuine warning. The captain tried to speak again, but Marcus raised a hand, silencing her without even looking. "Let's say I'm interested," Marcus said slowly. "What's this something bigger you're talking about?" Krell's expression shifted. "Just slightly. It's a war," he said. "Not the kind fought with fleets and armies. This is different. It's quiet. It's already started in places you can't see. Worlds are falling, but no one knows they're dead yet." He took another step closer, lowering his voice so only Marcus could hear. "And if you think I'm dangerous, you haven't seen them." For the first time, Marcus's smile faded, but only a fraction. He wasn't scared. He was calculating. "You want my help," Marcus said, "but you're not telling me everything." Krell grinned again. "I'm telling you enough to know you'll say yes." His eyes glinted with challenge. unless you're afraid. The room went even quieter, though no one thought that was possible. Every crew member watched Marcus, waiting for him to answer. The human leaned forward, his eyes locked on Krell's. "I don't work for killers," he said, his tone like steel, "but I'll work with one if the threat is real." Krell's grin widened. "It's real." The captain slammed her hand on the table. "This is insane," she shouted. "We can't trust him." But Marcus didn't look at her. He stood slowly, the chair scraping against the floor, and faced Krell at eye level. "Fine," Marcus said. "Tell me where we start." Krell's voice dropped into something almost like respect. "We start by leaving this station," he said, "because in less than an hour, it won't exist." The crew froze. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You're sure?" Krell nodded. "The same people who sent me here, they've decided you all know too much. I was supposed to finish the job quietly, but now they're sending something much louder. You want to live? You follow me." Now, for a second, Marcus didn't move. Then he turned to the crew. "You heard him? Move." His voice carried a command that didn't need to be explained. The crew hesitated, torn between obeying their captain and trusting the human who had just made a deal with a killer. The captain herself stood frozen, but when the floor beneath them trembled slightly, she made her choice. Everyone to the transport bay.
Oh, Krell smirked.
"I told you," he said to Marcus as they both started moving toward the door. "You're dangerous." Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. The faint smile had returned to his face, and in the reflection of Krell's dark eyes, it looked like the smile of someone who was already thinking 10 steps ahead. The alien's hand trembled slightly as it reached for the weapon. The room had gone completely silent, except for the faint hum of the station's ventilation system. Every non-human in the chamber was leaning back in their seats, their eyes darting between the killer standing in the doorway and the human who sat directly across from him. The killer's cold, glassy eyes roamed over the room like a predator searching for its next meal, but every time they returned to the human, something in them faltered. It wasn't fear in the human's eyes. It wasn't even the cautious tension of someone preparing for a fight. No, what the killer saw was far worse. It was a smile. A slow, deliberate curl of the lips that spoke not of nervousness, but of an almost cruel confidence in the outer ring of the council chamber. Whispers spread like sparks through dry grass. Names were murmured, half-remembered rumors resurfaced, and stories of the human's past began to form in the minds of those who had dismissed them as exaggerated. The human had been a soldier once. Some said a mercenary. Others claimed he was something far darker, a man who had been on worlds no a sane person would even approach. They called Earth a death world for a reason. Its creatures, its storms, its diseases, they were the things that kept most species awake at night. But it was the humans themselves who were the most dangerous. The killer stepped forward, the sound of his boots echoing sharply on the metallic floor. A scent of ozone and oil drifted from the weapon he carried, a jagged-edged plasma blade designed for close-range killing. Several guards, their hands hovering near their holsters, looked ready to intervene, but one glance from the human stopped them cold. It wasn't a command. It was more like an unspoken promise. The human didn't need help. "Do you think you can frighten me?" The human finally spoke, his voice low, but carrying effortlessly across the chamber. The killer didn't answer, but his grip on the blade tightened. The human's eyes stayed locked on him, steady and unblinking. "I've seen worse," he said, leaning back slightly in his chair, as if settling in for an evening's entertainment. "I've smelled worse. Hell, I've fought worse." The tone wasn't arrogance. It was truth. The killer's jaw twitched, and for the first time, his predatory posture shifted. He had walked into this room expecting to feed on fear. It was how he worked. Break the spirit before spilling the blood. But the human wasn't breaking. He wasn't even bending. The aliens' people had a word for an enemy like this: black horizon. Something you could see approaching, but could never escape from. A low murmur rose from the delegates as the killer took another step forward. Now within striking range, the human didn't move. He didn't flinch. His hand rested casually on the table, fingers relaxed, as though he was already certain of the outcome. Go on, he said softly, almost daring the killer. Make your move. That was when it happened. Single movement so fast most of the onlookers didn't even see. It shifted the balance in the room. The killer's blade slashed downward. But it met not flesh, not bone, but the hard, unyielding grip of the human's own hand locking onto his wrist. The sound of bone popping under sudden pressure echoed like a gunshot, and the weapon clattered to the floor. In the same instant, the human's other hand was around the killer's throat, not squeezing hard enough to kill, but enough to show. He could. The killer's feet scraped against the floor, trying to find balance. But the human leaned in so close their foreheads almost touched. You came here thinking you were the predator, the human whispered, his voice so low only the killer could truly hear. But you walked into a room with something far worse. Then, without ceremony, he shoved the killer backward. The alien stumbled, hitting the wall with a dull thud, his chest heaving as though the very air had turned heavy. The council guards, now emboldened, stepped forward to restrain the intruder. But the human's eyes flicked toward them. Not yet, he said sharply. He leaves on his own. The killer, clutching his injured wrist, stared at him for several long seconds. In those seconds, the truth settled in. No threat would work. Here, no intimidation would succeed. The human wasn't prey. He was something predators learned to avoid. When the killer finally turned and staggered out of the chamber, the silence that followed was deafening. Every alien in the room now looked at the human with a mix of awe, fear, and something that almost resembled respect. He sat back down, adjusted the cuff of his jacket, and glanced at the stunned faces around him. "What?" he asked with a small grin. "You were expecting me to scream?" For the rest of that session, not a single delegate dared interrupt him. Even the ones who had been his loudest critics before found new reasons to stay quiet. In that moment, it wasn't just the killer who had learned something, it was everyone. Humans didn't need to roar to be dangerous. Sometimes all it took was a smile. The ship's corridors felt different now. Every shadow seemed to lean closer. Every echo of footsteps seemed sharper. The killer was still out there, but the crew's fear wasn't what it had been. No, now the fear was for the killer himself, because since the moment the human smiled, something had shifted. Commander Vellner walked with quick steps, his scales rippling nervously. He couldn't shake the image of the human, sitting calmly in the mess hall while everyone else had frozen. That smile, calm, confident, almost playful, wasn't normal. It wasn't the smile of someone who didn't understand the danger. It was the smile of someone who did, and who welcomed it. They reached the armory. 2 guards were stationed outside, weapons ready. Inside, the human Jackson was checking over a long-barreled Pulse rifle as if he were inspecting a tool he'd used 100 times before. He looked up when Vellner entered. "Commander Jackson said," his voice steady. "We've got maybe 30 minutes before he moves again. He's testing us. We'll keep picking isolated targets until he makes you panic. Then he'll come." For the bridge, Vellner's tail twitched. "Speak as though you've hunted his kind before." Jackson shrugged. "Not his kind exactly, but the mindset. Yeah, I've met people like him." He finished loading the rifle and slung it. Over his shoulder. "Your security teams are too rigid. You follow patterns. That's why he's running circles around you. We need to move like him. We need to think like predators." The commander's throat tightened. "And you think you can predict him?"
Jackson
gave a half smile. "I don't need to predict him. I just need to make him realize he's not the only hunter here." Before Vellner could reply, the emergency lights flashed red. A voice came over the comm. "Sector for breach. Security team. Donnie's heading toward engineering." Jackson's eyes sharpened. "Engineering means he's going for the power core. If he blows it, we all die." Without waiting for orders, the human ran for the door, rifle in hand. Vellner hesitated for a fraction of a second before following. The ship's halls became a blur of metallic walls and flashing lights. Somewhere ahead, muffled screams echoed, followed by silence. They reached Sector 4. The air smelled faintly of ozone. The floor had dark smears where blood had pooled and begun to dry. Jackson knelt, studying the marks, his fingers brushing. "The edge of one. He's not moving fast," Jackson murmured. "He wants us to catch up. He's drawing us in." The commander's voice shook. "Then it's a trap." Jackson looked over his shoulder, and for the first time, there was no smile, only a cold, unblinking focus. Good. Let's walk right. Into it, they moved deeper into engineering. The massive power core pulsed with a steady blue glow, filling the room with an otherworldly light. For a moment, it seemed empty. Then, from behind one of the coolant pipes, the killer stepped out. Tall, armored in scavenged plating, his visor gleamed in the core's glow. His right hand held a curved blade that dripped with fresh blood. Vellner froze, every instinct screaming to run. But Jackson just tilted his head and smiled again. The killer's stance shifted just slightly, just enough to show he had noticed. "Been a long time since I met someone like you," Jackson said quietly. "Let's see if you're as dangerous as you think you are." The killer moved first, fast blurring across the floor. But Jackson was already in motion, diving to the side, the pulse rifle roaring in his hands. Bolts of energy lit the room, striking metal and sending sparks into the air. Vellner watched from the shadows, unable to move. The human fought with a precision that was terrifying, not panicked, not desperate, but calculated. Every movement was meant to corner, to pressure, to break his opponent's rhythm. The killer tried to flank him, but Jackson pivoted, smashing the butt of his rifle into the visor. The impact rang through the engineering bay, and the killer stumbled back. For the first time, Vellner thought he saw uncertainty in the murderer's movements. Jackson didn't press forward recklessly. He stepped in slow, deliberate keeping. The killer's attention locked on him. And then, in one fluid motion, he disarmed the man literally. The blade clattered to the ground, followed by a scream that was cut short when Jackson's rifle but connected with the killer's helmet. Again silence, the killer collapsed. Jackson looked down at him for a long moment, then exhaled. "He's not dead, yet you'll want to keep him alive for questioning. But trust me, Commander, if you let him loose again, I won't be so gentle next time." He turned, walking past Vellner without another word. And in that moment, Vellner realized something chilling. The killer had been terrifying, yes, but the human was something far worse. The hangar shook under the weight of explosions, each one closer than the last. Sirens screamed in every direction, warning lights flashing blood red across the steel walls. Smoke curled through the air, and the stench of burning metal mixed with the sharp bite of ozone from overloaded power lines. Outside, the killer's war machines closed in, dozens of them. Heavy walkers and hovering drones, each one bristling with weapons that could tear through armored walls like paper. The defenders were falling back, their lines breaking. The entire base was on the verge of collapse, but in the middle of the chaos, the human stood still. His helmet visor was cracked, his armor scorched black from the last fight, and blood trickled down the side of his face. Yet his eyes, cold, sharp, and unshaken, were locked on the massive hangar doors where the enemy would break through any second. The others around him were panicking. Soldiers yelled orders, medics dragged the wounded toward evacuation pods, and engineers desperately tried to get the emergency shields working. But the human, he just smiled. Commander Tall, who had fought alongside him for weeks now, didn't understand it. "Do you not see what's happening?" she shouted, stepping in front of him. "We have to leave now. They'll slaughter everyone if we stay here." He looked at her, his voice steady. "If we run, they'll still hunt us down. You know that? They want all of us dead. The only way out is through them." Tao froze. The certainty in his tone wasn't arrogance, it was something else, something heavier. She had seen fear in every species before, even the bravest warriors. But this human didn't seem to have any left. It was like he had burned through it long ago and replaced it with something far more dangerous. The hangar doors groaned, the steel bending inward as massive claws tore at the locks. Sparks rained down from above. The killers were here, the human. Grabbed his rifles, barrel dented, its ammo counter flashing reddened, slung it over his shoulder. Then he pulled something else from his pack, a small black device, no larger than his palm. Tal recognized it instantly. What is an implosion, charge illegal in half the galaxy for how brutally it destroyed matter? You can't be serious. She whispered. He gave her that same calm smile. "This place is their way in. If I close it, nothing gets through." Her eyes widened. "That blast will kill everything within 100 meters. You won't make it out." The doors buckled again, and a mechanical screech filled the air. Shadows of the killers loomed against the torn steel.
Al the human didn't answer her.
Dead. He stepped forward, each boot hitting the floor with slow, deliberate weight. It wasn't the walk of a man going to his death, it was the walk of someone who had already accepted it. The first killer burst through a hulking monster of alloy and flesh, its claws wet with blood. It roared, a sound that rattled the bones of every soldier in the hangar. The defenders near the breach froze in terror, but the human didn't. In one smooth motion, raised his rifle and fired a burst that punched through the killer's faceplate, dropping it instantly. The smile never left his lips. More of them poured in dozens at once. The human moved like he'd done this 100 times before, his shots precise, each one finding a weak point. But there were too many. Defenders were being overrun. "TAHL!" screamed into her come, all units fall back. Now, but the human's voice cut through the chaos. "Hold the line," he roared, louder than the battle itself. And somehow, they did. Soldiers who were moments from breaking steadied their aim. Engineers grabbed rifles. Even the wounded took up positions. It was as if his defiance was contagious. The killers kept coming, but the human kept pushing forward, step by step toward the breach, toward the place where the implosion charge would end them all. One of the largest killers, a towering brute with twin plasma cannons for arms, stepped into the hangar. Its cannons lit up, the heat so intense the floor began to melt. The human didn't slow down. He ran straight at it. Plasma bolts scorched past him, one glancing off his armor and sending him to one knee. For a second, Tal thought he wouldn't get back up, but then he did faster, angrier. He leapt, clinging to the brute's armored chest, planting the implosion. Charged directly on its core. The brute swung wildly, trying to crush him, but he pushed off, landing hard on the deck. The charge's timer began to flash, a sharp, rapid pulse. 10 seconds. The human turned, locking eyes with Tal across the hangar. In that moment, everything seemed to slow. He didn't look afraid. He didn't look like a man facing death. Looked satisfied. Then he shouted one final order. "Get him out of here." The defenders moved, dragging the wounded, running for the side exits as the killers roared and surged forward again. Tal wanted to run to him to stop him, but the sheer force of the battle pulled her away. She made it to the blast doors at the far end of the hangar, stumbling into the corridor just as the charge went off. The sound was like the universe tearing in half. A wave of crushing force ripped through the base, followed by a silence so deep it felt unnatural. When Tal looked back, the hangar was gonna nothing left but twisted metal and a swirling black void where the implosion had eaten reality itself. The killers were gone. So was the human. Days later, when the survivors regrouped, they spoke of him in hushed voices. It's not because of how he fought, or even because of what he did, but because of how he smiled in the face of the galaxy's worst nightmare. And somewhere deep in her mind, Tal couldn't help but think, maybe the killers weren't wrong to fear him.